Dr. Marcus Chen pulled into his suburban Virginia driveway at exactly 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday evening that would be his last moment of normal life. The aerospace engineer had spent 15 years working on classified projects for the Department of Defense, but nothing had prepared him for what he'd discovered in the past 6 months as the lead researcher for the Pentagon's Unidentified Aerial Phenomena UAP Task Force. Marcus sat in his silver Honda Accord for a moment, staring at the modest 2-story house where he lived with his wife Sarah and their 8-year-old daughter Emma. The American flag hanging from his front porch fluttered in the evening breeze, a symbol of the country he'd sworn to serve with distinction and honor, but tonight that oath felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. Inside his briefcase lay documents that could change everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe. Video files showing craft performing maneuvers that defied known physics. Radar data confirming objects moving at impossible speeds without producing sonic booms. Most disturbing of all, evidence that some people within the government had been systematically suppressing this information for decades. Marcus had joined the UAP Task Force, believing he would help bring transparency to the UFO question. Instead, he'd uncovered a conspiracy that went far deeper than cover-ups and classification stamps. He'd found evidence of technology recovery programs, biological samples of unknown origin, and worst of all, a shadow network within the military-industrial complex that would do anything to keep these secrets buried. As he walked up his front steps, Marcus didn't notice the unmarked sedan that had been following him for the past 3 days, or the fact that his home phone had been tapped since last weekend. He was about to discover that some truths are too dangerous to know, and that the people tasked with protecting national security sometimes see whistleblowers as threats more dangerous than foreign enemies. Block 2. The discovery that changed everything. 300 words. 6 months earlier, Marcus had been handpicked to join the Pentagon's UAP Task Force by Admiral Rebecca Torres, a career naval officer known for her integrity and scientific approach to national security issues. The task force had been created following public pressure after several high-profile UAP incidents involving military personnel, and Admiral Torres wanted scientists, not just military analysts, examining the evidence. Dr. Chen, Admiral Torres had said during their first meeting in a windowless conference room deep within the Pentagon, "I need someone who can look at this data with fresh eyes, someone who isn't invested in maintaining the status quo." Marcus had accepted the position eagerly, believing he would be analyzing atmospheric phenomena, experimental aircraft, and sensor malfunctions. Instead, on his first day, he was shown video footage that made his PhD in aerospace engineering feel worthless. The videos showed objects performing 90-degree turns at speeds that should have torn apart any known material, craft accelerating from 0 to thousands of miles per hour instantaneously. Most unnervingly, objects that seemed to respond to the presence of military aircraft as if they were aware of being observed. The breakthrough moment came 3 months into his assignment, when Marcus was granted access to what was called the Heritage Collection, an archive of UAP incidents dating back to 1947. Buried within decades of reports, Marcus found a pattern that made his blood run cold. The craft weren't just random visitors. They showed increasing interest in humanity's nuclear capabilities, appearing consistently near missile silos, nuclear power plants, and weapons development facilities. But it was document HX7742, buried in a sub-basement filing cabinet, that changed everything. The document, dated 1952, detailed the recovery of a craft and its occupants near Roswell Army Airfield. The biological analysis section made Marcus's hands shake as he read it. The beings weren't just unknown, they appeared to be human, but human in a way that suggested genetic modification far beyond current Earth capabilities. Block 3. The shadow network emerges. 300 words. As Marcus delved deeper into the heritage collection, he began to notice discrepancies that troubled his scientific mind. Reports would reference supporting documents that didn't exist in the files. Video evidence mentioned in testimonies was missing from the archives. Most concerning, several researchers who had previously worked on UAP analysis had abruptly left government service with no forwarding information. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a predecessor in Marcus's role, had simply vanished from all records after submitting a report titled Implications of Non-Human Intelligence for National Security Strategy. Her personnel file showed she'd resigned voluntarily, but Marcus found emails in archived servers suggesting she'd been preparing to go public with evidence of a cover-up. The pattern became undeniable when Marcus attempted to access certain classified databases mentioned in older reports. His security clearance, supposedly granting him access to all UAP-related materials, was repeatedly denied for files that clearly fell within his mandate. When he raised these concerns with Admiral Torres, she seemed genuinely surprised by the access restrictions. Dr. Chen, your clearance should give you access to everything related to the task force, Admiral Torres said during a private meeting. Let me make some calls. But Admiral Torres's inquiries were met with responses that chilled both of them. She was told that certain materials were under compartmentalized oversight by agencies that wouldn't identify themselves to the task force. When she pressed for details, she was informed that her questions were being noted and that she should focus on current incidents rather than historical cases. Marcus realized they weren't just dealing with classification protocols. There was an active effort to prevent the official UAP Task Force from accessing information that officially should have been theirs to analyze. Someone with significant power wanted to ensure that certain truths remained buried, even from the people supposedly investigating them. Block 4, the first warning, 300 words. The first sign that Marcus had crossed a dangerous line came on a Thursday morning when he arrived at his office to find his computer had been remotely accessed overnight. Security logs showed his files had been copied, but when he reported the breach to IT security, he was told no unauthorized access had been detected. That afternoon, Marcus received a call on his direct office line from someone who identified himself only as Mr. Smith from Internal Security Review. Dr. Chen, we need to discuss some concerns about your recent research activities. There are questions about whether you're exceeding the scope of your assignment. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. I'm researching exactly what Admiral Torres asked me to research, UAP incidents and their implications for national security. Dr. Chen, some of the materials you've been accessing are outside the current mission parameters. We strongly advise you to focus on contemporary incidents rather than historical archives. Who is we? Marcus asked. I'd like to see documentation of any restrictions on my research. The line went silent for several seconds before Mr. Smith replied, Dr. Chen, I'm going to give you some friendly advice. You have a beautiful family, a nice home, a prestigious career. Some information is classified not just for national security, but for the safety of the people who might encounter it. Think carefully about how far you want to pursue certain lines of inquiry. The call ended, leaving Marcus staring at his phone in disbelief. He'd just been threatened by someone within his own government, someone who knew enough about his personal life to mention his family specifically. That evening, he noticed a van parked across from his house that hadn't been there before. When he checked the next morning, it was gone, but Marcus was beginning to understand that his life was no longer his own. Block 5, the Alliance forms, 300 words. Feeling increasingly isolated and paranoid, Marcus reached out to Dr. James Mitchell, a former colleague who had worked on classified aerospace projects before leaving government service abruptly 3 years earlier. Marcus and James had maintained a friendship despite the mysterious circumstances of James's departure, and Marcus hoped his former colleague might provide insight into the situation. They met at a small coffee shop in downtown DC, far from both the Pentagon and Marcus's usual haunts. James listened carefully as Marcus described his experiences with the UAP Task Force, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Marcus, you've stumbled into something that's been operating since the 1940s, James said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't being overheard. "There's a network within the military-industrial complex that's been managing UAP information for decades. They operate outside normal government oversight." James explained that he'd encountered the same resistance when his own research had gotten too close to sensitive information. "They call themselves custodians of national security, but they're really custodians of their own power. They've built an empire around controlling information about non-human intelligence." "But why?" Marcus asked. "If there's evidence of advanced technology, shouldn't our government be studying it?" James laughed bitterly. "They are studying it, Marcus. They've been reverse engineering recovered technology for 70 years. But they're not sharing it with the rest of the government, let alone the public. Think about what disclosure would mean: the collapse of current power structures, economic systems, religious beliefs. These people see themselves as protecting civilization from chaos." James leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I left because I realized they were monitoring my family, following my daughter to school. My wife started receiving anonymous calls. The message was clear: back off or face consequences." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "Are you saying they'd actually hurt innocent people?" "I'm saying they view this as a matter of planetary security. In their minds, maintaining the secret justifies any action. Block 6, the evidence mounts, 300 words. Despite the warnings, Marcus couldn't abandon his research. The scientist in him needed to understand the full scope of what was being hidden. Working carefully and using techniques James had taught him to avoid detection, Marcus began assembling a comprehensive picture of the Shadow Network's operations. Through careful analysis of budget documents, personnel transfers, and contracting records, Marcus identified a web of connections between aerospace companies, intelligence agencies, and academic institutions that had been collaborating on UAP-related projects for decades. The funding came through black budget programs buried so deep in classified spending that even congressional oversight committees couldn't trace it. Marcus discovered that several major technological breakthroughs of the past 50 years, advances in materials science, propulsion systems, and energy storage, had originated from these classified programs. Technologies that had eventually found their way into commercial applications, making certain companies and individuals extraordinarily wealthy, while the public remained unaware of their true origins. Most disturbing was his discovery of what appeared to be a deliberate campaign of disinformation. The Shadow Network hadn't just hidden evidence of UAP encounters. They'd actively promoted false explanations, discredited witnesses, and created a culture of ridicule around the subject that prevented serious scientific inquiry. Dr. Helen Rodriguez, a psychiatrist who had evaluated military personnel reporting UAP encounters, had documented a pattern of witnesses being pressured to recant their testimonies, transferred to remote assignments, or forced into early retirement. Some had suffered mysterious accidents or sudden illnesses that ended their military careers. Marcus realized that the official UAP Task Force wasn't meant to reveal the truth. It was meant to provide the illusion of transparency, while ensuring that the real secrets remained hidden. Admiral Torres and her team were being given carefully curated information that supported the narrative the Shadow Network wanted to maintain. The question that haunted Marcus was whether Admiral Torres was complicit in the deception or simply another victim of it. Block 7. The personal cost begins. 300 words. As Marcus's investigation deepened, The pressure on his personal life intensified. Sarah began reporting strange phone calls during the day, calls where the person would hang up as soon as she answered. Emma mentioned that a man in a dark suit had asked her teacher questions about her family during school pickup. Marcus's routine was being subtly disrupted in ways designed to create stress and paranoia. His favorite lunch spot would suddenly be closed for maintenance when he arrived. Traffic lights would malfunction, creating delays that made him late for meetings. His credit cards would be declined for mysterious technical reasons, forcing him to call banks and resolve computer glitches. The psychological pressure was expertly applied, never anything dramatic enough to prove harassment, but a constant drip of small disruptions that made Marcus question his own perceptions. He began to understand why Dr. Elizabeth Warren and others had simply walked away from their research, but Marcus also began to receive unexpected support. Dr. Linda Park, a materials scientist who had briefly worked on the UAP Task Force before being reassigned, contacted him through encrypted channels. She had saved copies of data that had later been classified beyond her access level. "They're not just hiding the existence of these craft," Dr. Park told Marcus during a clandestine meeting in a public park. "They're hiding the fact that we've successfully reverse-engineered some of the technology. There are prototypes being tested at facilities that don't officially exist." Dr. Park shared photographs she had taken with a hidden camera during her brief time at one of these facilities. The images showed craft that looked similar to reported UAPs, but with clear evidence of human manufacturing techniques and materials. "Marcus, we're not just dealing with a cover-up of alien visitation. We're dealing with a cover-up of the most significant technological advancement in human history, and they're keeping it for themselves." Gate, the leak strategy, 300 words. Realizing that working within the system would never expose the truth, Marcus began planning to go public with his evidence. He reached out to investigative journalist Rebecca Hayes, who had built a reputation for breaking national security stories that other reporters wouldn't touch. Rebecca was initially skeptical. "Dr. Chen, I've covered enough UFO stories to know that 99% of the claims turn out to be misunderstandings or hoaxes. What makes your evidence different?" Marcus showed her a fraction of what he'd collected, enough to demonstrate the credibility of his sources without revealing everything at once. Rebecca's skepticism evaporated when she saw official Pentagon documents describing technology that shouldn't exist according to current physics. "This is either the biggest hoax in government history or the biggest story of the century," Rebecca said after reviewing the materials. "But if we're going to do this, we need to be careful. Sources who challenge national security narratives tend to have their lives ruined, or worse." They developed a careful strategy for releasing the information. Rebecca would publish articles based on Marcus's evidence while protecting his identity as the source. Multiple copies of the evidence would be secured in different locations, with dead man switches that would automatically release everything if something happened to Marcus. But even as they planned, Marcus noticed the surveillance intensifying. The unmarked sedan was now parked outside his house every night. His office computer was being accessed more frequently, and he suspected his phones were being monitored. Sarah confronted him one evening after Emma had gone to bed. "Marcus, what's going on? Emma's teacher asked me if we were having financial problems because someone from social services had been asking about our family situation." Marcus realized he couldn't protect his family while continuing his investigation. The Shadow Network was escalating their pressure tactics, moving from subtle harassment to direct threats against his wife and daughter. Block 9. The breaking point. 300 words. The tipping point came on a Friday evening when Marcus arrived home to find Sarah packing suitcases. Emma sat on the living room couch, tears streaming down her face, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. "Sarah, what's happening?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Someone came to my office today," Sarah said without looking at him. "A woman who said she was from the FBI. She showed me photos of Emma at school, at the playground, at her dance class. She said that my husband was involved in activities that could put our family at risk." Marcus felt sick. "Sarah, whatever they told you, it's not true. I'm trying to expose the truth about—" "I don't care what truth you're trying to expose," Sarah interrupted, her voice breaking. "Someone threatened our daughter, Marcus. They know where she goes to school, what route she walks home, what time I pick her up from dance class. How is any truth worth putting Emma in danger?" Marcus knelt beside Emma, who wrapped her small arms around his neck. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" she whispered. "No, sweetheart. Daddy just learned about some things that some people don't want him to talk about, but we're going to be okay." Sarah was taking Emma to stay with her sister in Oregon until the situation resolved itself. Marcus wanted to argue, to explain that running away wouldn't solve anything, but he couldn't risk his family's safety for his principles. As he watched his wife and daughter drive away that night, Marcus understood that he had crossed a line from which there was no return. The Shadow Network had effectively taken his family hostage to ensure his silence, but instead of deterring him, their tactics only strengthened his resolve. If they were willing to threaten an innocent child to protect their secrets, then those secrets were too dangerous to remain hidden. Block 10. Going underground. 300 words. With his family safely away, Marcus took a leave of absence from the Pentagon, claiming stress-related health issues. He moved out of his suburban home and into a series of safe houses that Rebecca Hayes had arranged through her network of sources who specialized in protecting whistleblowers. Working from secure locations and using encrypted communications, Marcus began compiling a comprehensive dossier of everything he'd discovered. He documented not just the evidence of UAP encounters and recovered technology, but the entire infrastructure of the Shadow Network that had been hiding this information from the American people and their elected representatives. The picture that emerged was staggering in its scope. The network included current and former military officers, intelligence officials, aerospace executives, and even some members of Congress who sat on defense appropriations committees. They had created what amounted to a parallel government structure with access to unlimited black budget funding and no accountability to traditional oversight mechanisms. Dr. James Mitchell helped Marcus understand the historical context of what they were fighting. "This started during World War II, James explained during one of their clandestine meetings. When the government realized that advanced technology could determine the outcome of global conflicts, they created special access programs to protect the most sensitive research. But over time, these programs became self-perpetuating entities that prioritized their own survival over their original mission. Marcus also learned that he wasn't the first person to attempt to expose this conspiracy. Over the decades, numerous government employees, military personnel, and contractors had tried to bring these secrets to light. Some had been discredited through character assassination campaigns. Others had faced legal prosecution on trumped-up charges. A disturbing number had died in accidents or suicides that their families insisted were suspicious. "The difference now," Rebecca told Marcus, "is that we have documentary evidence, not just testimonies. And we have a media environment where people are more willing to question official narratives about government secrecy." Block 11. The hunt intensifies, and 300 words. As Marcus prepared to go public with his evidence, the Shadow Network's efforts to stop him escalated dramatically. His bank accounts were frozen due to suspected tax irregularities. His security clearance was suspended pending an investigation into unauthorized disclosure of classified information. Most ominously, He learned that a federal grand jury had been convened to consider espionage charges against him. "They're using the legal system as a weapon," Rebecca explained as they reviewed the charges being prepared. "Even if you're eventually cleared, the process will destroy your reputation and drain your resources." Most people back down when faced with the prospect of spending their life savings on legal fees and possibly going to prison. But Marcus had allies he didn't know about. Dr. Linda Park contacted him with news that other scientists within the government were ready to support his efforts. Admiral Torres, who had apparently been conducting her own investigation into why the UAP Task Force was being denied access to certain information, was prepared to testify about the obstruction she had encountered. Most surprisingly, Marcus learned that there were people within the shadow network itself who were having second thoughts about the decades-long cover-up. Dr. Robert Kaiser, a former aerospace engineer who had worked on reverse engineering projects, reached out through intermediaries to offer his testimony. "I've spent 40 years helping to hide technology that could solve climate change, revolutionize transportation, and fundamentally improve human civilization," Dr. Kaiser said during a carefully arranged meeting. "I convinced myself we were protecting people from information they weren't ready to handle. But I've watched the world struggle with problems we've already solved in secret. The time for hiding this knowledge has passed." However, Marcus also learned that his opponents were prepared to go to extreme lengths to protect their secrets. Rebecca's investigation into the shadow network had uncovered evidence that previous whistleblowers hadn't just faced legal and financial pressure. Some had been subjected to sophisticated psychological operations designed to make them appear mentally unstable. Block 12, The Media Storm, 300 words. Rebecca Hayes published her first article on a Thursday morning, and by noon, the story had exploded across social media and news networks worldwide. The headline read, "Pentagon scientist claims government has recovered alien technology, hidden evidence for decades." The article included just enough documentary evidence to prove that Marcus's claims weren't the ramblings of a conspiracy theorist. Official Pentagon memos discussing non-human technology, budget documents for programs that didn't officially exist, and testimonies from multiple government scientists who corroborated key aspects of Marcus's account. The immediate response was everything Marcus had expected and feared. Government spokespeople denied the allegations, claiming that the documents were either fabricated or misinterpreted. Marcus was portrayed as a disgruntled employee who had violated his oath and put national security at risk by disclosing classified information. Dr. Chen was removed from his position due to security concerns and performance issues, Pentagon spokesperson Colonel Janet Webb told reporters. His allegations are the desperate claims of someone facing potential criminal prosecution for betraying his country's trust. But the story had momentum that the usual debunking efforts couldn't stop. Other media outlets began investigating independently, and more sources came forward with their own evidence of UAP cover-ups. Social media amplified every new revelation, and public pressure mounted for congressional hearings and official investigations. Most importantly, the story had been released strategically across multiple platforms simultaneously, making it impossible for authorities to suppress. Copies of the evidence had been distributed to journalists, scientists, and government officials around the world. Marcus watched the media coverage from one of Rebecca's safe houses, knowing that his life as he had known it was over. Whether he had succeeded in exposing the truth or simply destroyed himself in a futile gesture would depend on what happened in the next few days. At this point, I'm curious where everyone watching this incredible story is located. Drop a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this amazing tale of courage and conspiracy has reached. Block 13. The counterattack, 300 words. The Shadow Network's response to the media exposure was swift and sophisticated. Within 48 hours of Rebecca's initial article, a coordinated disinformation campaign began flooding social media and news outlets with alternative narratives designed to discredit Marcus and muddy the waters around his revelations. Fake documents appeared online that contradicted Marcus's evidence, created with such skill that only expert analysis could identify them as forgeries. Anonymous sources leaked information claiming that Marcus had been under investigation for selling secrets to foreign governments. His personal life was dissected and weaponized. Old college photos were taken out of context, his divorce records were misrepresented, and former colleagues were pressured to make statements about his character and stability. Most insidiously, the network began promoting alternative explanations for the evidence Marcus had provided. They acknowledged that some of the documents were real, while claiming they related to conventional weapons development programs that had been misunderstood by Marcus's inexpert analysis. Dr. Chen was a talented engineer, but he wasn't read into the full context of these programs, claimed Dr. Arthur Vance, a supposed former Pentagon official who appeared on multiple news programs. He saw fragments of legitimate defense research and constructed an elaborate conspiracy theory because he didn't understand what he was looking at. The strategy was working. Public opinion began to shift as people struggled to distinguish between authentic evidence and sophisticated misinformation. The 24-hour news cycle moved on to other stories, and the initial shock of Marcus's revelations began to fade. But Marcus had anticipated this response. Working with Rebecca and a team of investigative journalists, they had prepared a second wave of evidence that would be much harder to discredit. Video footage of the secret facilities where reverse engineering was taking place. Audio recordings of Shadow Network members discussing their operations. Financial records proving the existence of the black budget programs. The real battle for truth was just beginning. Block 14. Unexpected allies. 300 words. As the disinformation campaign against Marcus intensified, support came from an unexpected source. Senator Patricia Coleman, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, announced that her committee would hold public hearings on Marcus's allegations and the government's handling of UAP information. Senator Coleman had built her political career on government transparency and oversight. She had been following the UAP story for years and had grown increasingly frustrated with the Pentagon's evasive responses to her committee's questions. The American people deserve to know what their government knows about these phenomena, Senator Coleman declared at a press conference. If Dr. Chen's allegations are true, then we're dealing with the most significant security breach in our nation's history, not because information was disclosed, but because it was hidden from the people's elected representatives. The announcement of congressional hearings changed the dynamics of the entire situation. It provided Marcus and his allies with legal protection as potential witnesses, while putting enormous pressure on the Shadow Network to either come forward voluntarily or risk being exposed through congressional subpoenas. Admiral Torres agreed to testify about the obstruction her UAP Task Force had encountered. Dr. Linda Park and Dr. Robert Kaiser also committed to appearing before the committee. Most importantly, Senator Coleman's staff had been quietly investigating the financial irregularities Marcus had identified, and they had uncovered evidence of illegal funding streams that bypassed congressional oversight. This isn't just about UFOs, Senator Coleman's chief of staff told Rebecca Hayes during a background briefing. This is about accountability. If there really is a shadow network operating outside democratic oversight, that's a threat to our constitutional system, regardless of what technology they're hiding. However, Marcus knew that testifying before Congress would make him a permanent target. Once he appeared publicly, there would be no returning to his old life. He would become a public figure forever associated with the UAP controversy, with all the benefits and dangers that status entailed. Block 15, The Whistleblower's Dilemma. 300 words. As the date for congressional hearings approached, Marcus faced an agonizing decision about how much of the truth to reveal. His evidence included information that went far beyond UAP encounters and recovered technology. He had uncovered evidence of ongoing contact between government officials and non-human intelligences, contact that had been maintained in secret for decades. The implications were staggering. If Marcus's information was accurate, the shadow network wasn't just hiding the existence of advanced technology. They were essentially conducting unauthorized diplomacy with non-human entities on behalf of humanity without any democratic oversight or accountability. Dr. James Mitchell warned Marcus about the consequences of revealing too much too quickly. The public can handle the idea that the government has been hiding UFO evidence, James said during one of their encrypted communications. But if you tell them that their leaders have been negotiating with aliens in secret, you'll cause a complete breakdown of trust in democratic institutions. Rebecca Hayes disagreed. The truth is the truth, Marcus. If you start deciding which parts of the truth people can handle, you're making the same decisions the shadow network has been making for 70 years. Marcus struggled with the ethical implications of his choice. He had become a whistleblower because he believed the American people deserved to know what their government was doing in their name. But he also recognized that some information might genuinely threaten social stability if released without proper preparation. The decision was made for him when he learned that the shadow network was planning to assassinate his character by claiming he had suffered a mental breakdown due to stress. Psychiatric reports were being prepared that would portray him as delusional, making it easy to dismiss his testimony regardless of the evidence he presented. Marcus realized that his only defense was to reveal everything. If he was going to be destroyed anyway, he might as well ensure that the complete truth came out with him. Block 16, The Final Preparations. 300 words. In the days leading up to his congressional testimony, Marcus worked around the clock to organize his evidence into a presentation that would be impossible to ignore or discredit. He compiled thousands of pages of documents, hundreds of hours of video and audio recordings, and testimony from dozens of witnesses who could corroborate different aspects of his claims. The evidence was organized into 3 categories: proof that UAP encounters had been systematically hidden from the public, documentation of successful reverse engineering programs that had produced functional technology, and evidence of ongoing contact between government representatives and non-human intelligences. Marcus knew that the 3rd category would be the most controversial and difficult to prove. The evidence consisted primarily of classified meeting transcripts, communication logs, and reports from facilities where these contacts allegedly took place. Without physical proof or live witnesses, skeptics would be able to dismiss these claims as fantasy. But Dr. Robert Kaiser provided the breakthrough Marcus needed. During their final meeting before the hearings, Dr. Kaiser revealed that he had video recordings from inside one of the contact facilities. "I recorded these sessions because I wanted documentation of what I was being asked to participate in," Dr. Kaiser explained as he showed Marcus footage that seemed to come from science fiction. "I never imagined I'd be using them to expose the entire program, but I can't be part of this deception anymore." The recordings showed meetings between government officials and beings that were clearly not human, but appeared to be working collaboratively on technology development projects. The conversations were conducted through translation devices, but the cooperation was obvious. Marcus realized that this evidence would change everything, not just public understanding of UAP phenomena, but fundamental assumptions about humanity's place in the universe and the nature of consciousness itself. Block 17, the testimony that shook the world, 300 words. The Senate Intelligence Committee hearing began at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that would be remembered as a watershed moment in human history. C-SPAN cameras broadcast the proceedings live, and millions of people around the world watched as Marcus took his oath to tell the truth. Senator Coleman opened with a statement that set the tone for what was to come. Today, we're here to investigate allegations that could fundamentally change our understanding of technology, national security, and humanity's place in the universe. We will follow the evidence wherever it leads, regardless of how uncomfortable that truth might be. Marcus began his testimony by establishing his credentials and credibility, then systematically presented evidence of the UAP cover-up. He showed classified documents proving that military personnel had been ordered to lie about their encounters. He presented budget records documenting the flow of taxpayer money into programs that didn't officially exist. The room fell silent when Marcus began describing the reverse engineering programs. He showed photographs of facilities where recovered technology was being studied and replicated. He presented testimony from engineers and scientists who had worked on these projects, describing advances in propulsion, materials science, and energy generation that were decades ahead of publicly acknowledged research. But the moment that changed everything came when Marcus revealed Dr. Kaiser's video recordings. As the committee and viewing audience watched footage of government officials meeting with clearly non-human intelligences, the implications hit home with devastating clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said as the videos concluded, "what you've just seen represents ongoing diplomatic contact between representatives of our government and non-human intelligences. These contacts have been maintained for decades without the knowledge or consent of the American people or their elected representatives. We are not alone in the universe, and our government has known this and hidden it from us." Block 18, Global Shockwaves, 300 words. Marcus's testimony triggered immediate global reactions that exceeded everyone's expectations. Within hours of the hearing's conclusion, governments around the world were scrambling to respond to the revelations. Some denied any knowledge of the programs Marcus had described, while others remained conspicuously silent. The United Nations Security Council called an emergency session to address the implications of unauthorized contact with non-human intelligences. Religious leaders issued statements ranging from acceptance to outright rejection of the possibility that humanity wasn't unique in the universe. Financial markets plunged as investors struggled to understand what the revelations meant for existing industries and economic structures. Energy companies' stock prices collapsed on speculation that the hidden technology could make fossil fuels obsolete. Aerospace and defense contractors saw their valuations swing wildly as traders tried to guess which companies might have been involved in the secret programs. But the most significant reaction came from the public. Instead of the panic and social chaos that the shadow network had predicted, the majority of people responded with curiosity and demands for more information. Polls showed that while people were angry about being lied to, they were more interested in learning about the hidden technology and its potential benefits than in punishing those responsible for the cover-up. Social media exploded with discussions about the implications of Marcus's revelations. Scientists, engineers, and researchers around the world began sharing their own experiences with unexplained phenomena and suppressed research. A grassroots movement emerged, demanding full disclosure of all hidden technology and the democratization of scientific advances that had been kept secret. However, the shadow network hadn't given up. Even as Marcus testified before Congress, they were implementing contingency plans designed to limit the damage from his revelations. They had spent decades preparing for the possibility of exposure, and they were ready to fight for their survival. Block 19, The Hunt Continues, done 300 words. In the aftermath of his congressional testimony, Marcus became the most famous whistleblower in modern history. But fame came with a price. He was now a permanent target for both supporters and enemies of disclosure. Death threats arrived daily, while offers for book deals and movie rights flooded in from entertainment companies. More concerning were the subtle signs that the shadow network was still actively working against him. Despite his public prominence, Marcus continued to face harassment designed to make his life miserable. His attempts to obtain a passport for international speaking engagements were delayed by bureaucratic complications. His bank accounts were subjected to repeated security reviews that froze his assets for days at a time. Most troubling was the pressure being applied to his allies. Dr. Robert Kaiser reported that his home had been burglarized, with the thieves taking only his computer equipment and research files. Admiral Torres found herself under investigation for unspecified security violations. Several other witnesses who had agreed to support Marcus's testimony suddenly withdrew their cooperation without explanation. Rebecca Hayes discovered that her newspaper was being pressured by advertisers to stop covering the UAP story. Government sources who had previously provided information to her were no longer returning her calls. Someone had hacked her personal email and social media accounts, posting messages designed to make her appear unstable and unreliable. "They can't put the genie back in the bottle," Rebecca told Marcus during one of their secure communications, "but they're going to make sure that everyone involved in releasing it pays a price. They want to discourage others from following your example." Marcus realized that his fight was far from over. Exposing the truth had been only the first step in a much longer battle for transparency and accountability. The shadow network had survived previous exposure attempts by waiting for public attention to move on to other issues, then quietly resuming their operations with enhanced security measures. Block 20, Building the Movement, 300 words. Recognizing that individual whistleblowers could be isolated and neutralized, Marcus began working to build a broader movement for disclosure and transparency. He connected with scientists, journalists, and activists around the world who shared his commitment to exposing hidden technology and ensuring democratic oversight of government programs. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a physicist from CERN, reached out to Marcus with evidence that European governments had their own versions of the secret programs he had exposed. Similar technology recovery efforts were being conducted in France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, all operating with the same level of secrecy and lack of democratic oversight. "This isn't just an American problem," Dr. Vasquez explained during a secure video conference. "There's an international network of government and corporate entities that have been collaborating on these projects for decades. They share information and technology while keeping their own populations in the dark." Marcus also learned that academic institutions around the world had been infiltrated by researchers working for the shadow network. Universities were being used as front organizations for classified research, with graduate students and faculty unknowingly contributing to projects they didn't fully understand. The movement began organizing around specific demands: full disclosure of all recovered technology, democratic oversight of any ongoing contact with non-human intelligences, and the immediate release of technological advances that could address climate change and other global challenges. International conferences were organized where scientists could share suppressed research without fear of retaliation. Secure communication networks were established to protect whistleblowers and prevent the isolation tactics that had been used against previous disclosure advocates. Marcus found himself becoming not just a witness to government secrecy, but a leader in a global movement for transparency and scientific freedom. The scared engineer, who had once sat in his car afraid to enter his own home, had evolved into someone willing to challenge the most powerful institutions on Earth. Block 21. The Technology Revolution. Your 300 words. As more evidence emerged from the global disclosure movement, independent scientists and engineers began attempting to replicate the technology described in the leaked documents. While they lacked access to the recovered artifacts that government programs had been studying, they could work from the theoretical frameworks and engineering principles that had been revealed. Dr. Sarah Kim, a materials scientist at MIT, made the first breakthrough when she successfully created a room-temperature superconductor using techniques described in documents Marcus had leaked. The material exhibited properties that had been considered impossible according to conventional physics, proving that the secret programs had indeed achieved revolutionary advances. We're not just talking about incremental improvements to existing technology. Dr. Kim announced at a press conference that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. These discoveries represent a fundamental paradigm shift in our understanding of physics and engineering. Other research teams around the world began achieving similar breakthroughs. A team in Japan developed a propulsion system that appeared to manipulate gravitational fields. Researchers in Germany created energy storage devices with capacities far beyond anything previously thought possible. The rapid pace of discovery vindicated Marcus's decision to go public. The technology that had been hidden for decades was finally being developed openly, with results shared immediately with the global scientific community instead of being locked away in classified programs. But the breakthroughs also vindicated the shadow network's concerns about disclosure. The new technologies were so revolutionary that they threatened to disrupt virtually every existing industry. Energy companies faced obsolescence as clean, unlimited power generation became possible. Transportation systems could be revolutionized by anti-gravity propulsion. Military applications were so advanced that they could render existing weapon systems useless. World leaders struggled to manage the social and economic disruption caused by the rapid pace of technological change. Some countries attempted to ban or restrict research into the new technologies, while others embraced them as opportunities for competitive advantage. Block 22, The New World Emerging, 300 words. 2 years after Marcus's congressional testimony, the world had changed in ways that exceeded even his most optimistic expectations. The technology that had been hidden in secret programs was now being developed openly by universities, corporations, and independent researchers around the globe. Clean energy systems based on the recovered technology were beginning to replace fossil fuel infrastructure. Transportation was being revolutionized by vehicles that could hover and travel at speeds previously impossible. Medical applications of the new materials and energy systems were extending human lifespans and curing diseases that had been considered incurable. But perhaps the most significant change was in humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. The confirmation that non-human intelligences existed and had been in contact with Earth governments forced a fundamental reassessment of religion, philosophy, and science. Contact protocols were established under United Nations oversight, ensuring that any future interactions with non-human intelligences would be conducted transparently with input from all of humanity rather than in secret by shadow networks. The beings that had been working with government programs agreed to more open contact, expressing relief that they no longer had to operate in secrecy. Marcus found himself serving as an advisor to the UN's new Department of Interspecies Relations, helping to establish frameworks for communication and cooperation between humanity and the various intelligences that had been monitoring Earth for centuries. His family had reunited, with Sarah and Emma returning once it became clear that the Shadow Network's power had been broken. Emma, now 10 years old, was growing up in a world where interstellar travel and communication with alien civilizations were accepted parts of reality. "Daddy," Emma asked one evening as they watched news coverage of the first public demonstration of anti-gravity transportation, "are you glad you told everyone the truth?" Marcus smiled as he watched humanity taking its first steps toward becoming a truly spacefaring civilization. "Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes the truth is scary, but it's always better than living a lie." Block 23, Legacy of Truth. 300 words. 5 years after Marcus Chen's decision to expose the Pentagon's UFO program, the world had become almost unrecognizable from the one he had known as a classified researcher. The technology that had been hidden for decades was now transforming every aspect of human civilization. Climate change was being addressed through clean energy systems that provided unlimited power without environmental impact. Space exploration had accelerated dramatically with propulsion systems that could reach other star systems in reasonable timeframes. Medical advances derived from non-human biotechnology were eliminating diseases and extending healthy human lifespans. But Marcus's greatest satisfaction came from the changes in how governments operated. The exposure of the Shadow Network had triggered reforms that made such massive deception impossible. Oversight systems now ensured that classified programs remained accountable to democratic institutions. International treaties required transparency in any research involving non-human technology or contact. The Shadow Network members who had threatened Marcus and his family had faced justice through international tribunals. Some had been imprisoned for their roles in suppressing technology that could have prevented environmental destruction and human suffering. Others had negotiated immunity in exchange for full cooperation with disclosure efforts. Marcus continued his work as a scientist, but now in full collaboration with non-human intelligences who shared advanced knowledge freely with humanity. The beings explained that they had been waiting for centuries for humans to mature enough as a species to handle the responsibilities that came with advanced technology. Your choice to prioritize truth over personal safety demonstrated that humanity was ready for the next phase of its development, one of the beings told Marcus during a public forum broadcast worldwide. Courage in the face of oppression is the hallmark of a civilization worthy of joining the broader galactic community. As Marcus looked back on his journey from frightened government employee to catalyst for humanity's greatest transformation, he realized that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is simply refuse to accept lies, no matter the personal cost.